Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Crime and Entertainment. I have here today a very interesting guest. I spoke with him last week, and I was really excited to get this interview going. Please welcome Adam Ratcliffe. Adam, how you doing, my friend?
I'm good. I'm good. How you doing?
I'm good. So we were talking before we hopped on air, and I was kind of going like, how do I introduce you? What would I introduce you as? But you have like a lot of titles. You are singer, songwriter, actor, producer. Before we get into like how one encompasses all those things, especially when it's your first time here, I like to start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about early life, where you grew up, and then we'll get into kind of what got you into the acting and producing and stuff like that.
Okay. Just I don't want to get long-winded, so I'm just going to kind of give you the long and the short. The extended version is too long. I'm one of five boys and a sister, so there's six of us. I'm number four. My mother had four. My dad remarried, and I grew up in Bucks County, which is 30 miles north of Philadelphia. And I
Yeah.
grew up an athlete. Dad and mom split when I was four. Met my uncle when I was six. He did 10 years in Graterford, which is a penitentiary state prison. My dad owns a Irish pub north of Northeast Philadelphia that's pretty well known, a staple in the community, called the Warwick Tavern. My mother was a school bus driver. So I am the epitome of blue collar. Grew up on Rocky, obviously, but I started playing little league football where my brothers were a little later in the game. They were like sixth, seventh grade. I started in kindergarten, and I was lucky to be the youngest of four because I kind of not only got to see the good things that they were able to do, and they were very athletic and big, but I got to see the bad things as well, and learn to steer clear of the traps that but fast forward, like I was excelling in sports, luckily, and very sensitive kid. When it comes to why I got into entertainment, my mother's dad was an actor, an off-Broadway actor from Canada. Her mom was Canada's top model at 18. She was tall, 6 foot. They were both alcoholic, but like wildly entertaining people, extremely talented. And he was a singer. So he would come and stay. And when he wasn't with us, he was kind of a Skid Row person. We actually detoxed him several times. But when I was like 12 years old, I caught him drinking my rubbing alcohol before oxypads were a thing for,
Right.
pimples. So that's the type of alcoholic I come from. So I was kind of bombarded by that from both ends. So, when you hear the old stories of all the movie stars in the 40s and 50s and the black and white, Shirley Temples, my story is very similar to that. So I was kind of an at-risk kid, and I was lucky to have played sports and excelled in sports and played in the cities. And so I was kind of raised by like counselors, other people's parents, football coaches, if you will, because my mom was pretty tired by the time I came around. And luckily, I wanted to be a productive kid. So fast forward to junior high, I'm doing stage plays at this point. Conrad Birdie is like a Elvis type musical that went through my junior high, and I got the standing ovation, and I was pretty much hooked ever since. So if you want to kind of classify who I was as a teen, I was all encompassing of what High School Musical was before that actually existed, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So,
Of course.
so I wound up in college with a football scholarship, and I had theater as a minor in college. And the long and the short, to make it really quick, I graduated after my fourth college, nearly 22, still a freshman, got sober, and I actually graduated with a communications media degree through NBC 10 in Philadelphia, logging highlights for the Phillies, and I had a theater minor. And because I was sober at the time and wasn't in the bar at my dad's bar, which I thought was like my destiny, I figured, you know what? If a kid like me, coming from where I came from, being around the redneck roughnecks that I knew could get sober and be sober, then I can embrace this acting thing. And I moved to New York City. The rest is kind of history. It took 22 years, and now I'm finally making a living at it. And I've put on the producer hat in the last 2 years. We have someone in common in Tom Sizemore.
Yeah.
I want to brazen 200 grand for a documentary, and I basically documented the end of his life for the past 3 years, which it's aged me, to be honest.
Yeah, I
So
interviewed him probably, I would say, a year and some change before he unfortunately passed away. So had to be somewhere in the middle of why you guys were were filming that, if you've done it in the last 3 years of his life, because I want to say it was like a year and a half after me and him had our show that he did pass away. Real quick, I want to step back. You say got sober. Would you consider yourself a full blown alcoholic during those years?
Oh yeah. You graduate to, there's levels of it. I was always a brownout drinker in my teens, and I definitely made some bad choices, fell out of cars, in snowbanks growing up and all that, at athletic events. I don't regret a lot in my life, Wade, because I was always trying to, like Mike Tyson with the 2 different lives up in the Catskills training and then coming to Brooklyn and robbing
Right.
people. I was like, I would go from my dad's bar, hanging out at my brother's apartment up above my dad's bar, to go into the honors English class. You know what I mean? And getting honors and getting nominated for prom king and all that stuff. So it was a very weird kind of dichotomy of like assimilating to different crowds my whole life, which
Right.
obviously, actors do. So when you asked what happened was I started to drink liquor. And once I started drinking liquor, it was like everything that I thought might have passed me by, because my brother, my oldest, was like 7 years sober at the time, and he was my idol. And now I'm out in Pittsburgh area in my 4th college playing rugby, gave up the football, and I'm drinking liquor. And this was just a whole nother level of blackout, and started getting like violent rages and wanting to start fights and stuff like that, and woke up in strange places and had people asking me about my family members in the quad in the daytime, not knowing who they were. So scary moments like that, seeking out counselors. And finally I called the AA hotline and wandering off campus and getting into a program. And, God willing, I'm 25 years sober this year in September, one day at a time.
Congratulations on that, my friend. I know it's not easy. I've always been one that would enjoy the, occasional drink, sometimes multiple out and about. And there's probably only one time in my life that I could say I was ever like maybe knocking on the door of that. I know a lot of times the hardest thing for an addict to do is admit they have the problem. But it started for me like, I was going out to restaurants and, meeting people, and I was drinking beers, and you drink 5 or 6 beers and, these things are like $5 a pop. And so I'm looking at the bill and I'm like, damn, I don't even feel buzzed, but I paid $40 in drinks. So
Wow.
that graduated me to, all right, well, now I'm going to drink liquor because I'll get
Yeah.
there faster and I'll get there a little cheaper. And then it got to where I would actually take in mini bottles in my coat. Like multiple. I would buy like a handle and just fill up multiple mini bottles. So I'd take like 2 mini bottles in this pocket, 2 in this pocket. I'd order a Coke, give it a good, gulp down and then dump the mini. So I'd drink all night long on $2.50. And, once about a month or 2 of that, then you realize, hey, I might need to tone it back a little bit. But
I had my first out of body experience on my 21st birthday at that college, and it was bizarre, and I remember it slightly, and everything after that I don't remember. But I called the whole bar outside. I started screaming "fraternities suck," and then I had DTs. Wayne, I woke up in my college dorm with blood all over my face. The pants that I had bought that night were ripped and shredded, and somebody told me that I woke up in a snowbank behind the alleyway of the rugby bar. I played rugby.
yeah,
And it was a big competitive school. And I know it sounds crazy, but I actually got sober in the rugby house about 8 months after that night. So it took some time going in and out of meetings and fellowshipping with people to get there. But I just didn't want to wind up back in I wanted something different for myself. And because I was such a self-loathing kind of depressive drunk, I couldn't take that anymore, waking up and feeling miserable and sick all the time,
yeah. That rugby's a tough sport, man.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Jeez.
We just won the national championship in my college, and because I have a movie coming out, I'm kind of getting a little press up there. And Pittsburgh has actually, believe it or not, become a movie town, and I work out there quite a bit. And I'm in the movie Southpaw that I think you saw in
Yeah.
Pittsburgh.
Southpaw was done by what, Kurt Sutter, correct? Or
Uh,
did he
it
write
was uh, it was Antoine Foucault from the
Training Day? He did Training Day.
Training Day. Yeah,
Yeah.
and a bunch of other stuff that he's actually done with Denzel.
So did
Antoine
Kurt
Foucault.
Sutter write it?
I think so. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It was a great script. It didn't do as well as I thought it would do. I know Creed came out right around the same time, and that's what
Mhm.
happens in the movie industry.
See, I'm a huge Kurt Sutter fan. I followed his work since he wrote for the Shield TV series of Michael Chiklis, and then obviously he was kind of the brains behind the whole Sons of Anarchy
Sam's
uh,
Venom. Yep.
show that was on FX. And I when I found out he was writing that, and then kind of seen the tone of the film, I just knew it was going to be something I would like. And I think Jake embodied that person, that guy that's just kind of losing everything, and did lose everything to a certain extent, and then had to build himself back up. I thought he played that really well. It's one of my actual favorite roles that he's ever done.
Me
To be
too. Forrest Whitaker and him sitting at the bar. I thought that Forrest Whitaker and he were in lockstep with each other. Forrest Whitaker's
Yeah.
always great,
Oh
but
yeah.
they were discussing his daughter, and I'm actually the one when he wakes up in the hospital. For your listeners, it tells him the state has taken your daughter. She's doing okay. He's in a daze, so it's like, I put my forearm right on his throat. We had a stuntman there. He was very gracious. I met him before in Melrose in L.A. and I told him the story of when I met him. I only lived in Los Angeles for 4 months, and that was like, I said, I got to go on a date while I'm here because I knew I was out of there. I'm too East Coast for that place.
Yeah.
And the date was telling me she was Puerto Rican. She was living with somebody from Girls Gone Wild, one of these reality TV producers. And she was nuts. She was Puerto Rican from Brooklyn. Go talk to him. Go talk to him. I told him this story. He laughed his ass off. I said, I don't bother celebrities. It's just not something, especially in a restaurant. He was sitting there
Yeah.
with what looked to be his mom or a manager. Right. She said, okay, what would you say to him if you went over and said something? So I looked at her. I said, I just watched Brokeback Mountain. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of balls to walk around Los Angeles playing that part. So I go out and smoke. I'm smoking at the time, and I look in, and she's leaning over, speaking to this woman and to Jake Gyllenhaal. And I said, "What'd you say to him?" I told him exactly what you said. He had a lot of balls.
Yeah. To this day, I've never watched that movie. I never did
Yeah,
watch it.
it's
And
okay.
you're right about LA. It is quite different. I recently took a trip out there at the beginning of last month in March, and I guess I just had something different in my head. Maybe I had the LA from the late 90s, early 2000s or something, but it just wasn't what I pictured. At least like the club vibe of it. The views were nice. Newport Beach was nice. I rode around there for
Yeah,
a little
man.
bit.
Those places are great. You go to
Yeah.
those places, Manhattan Beach. You go to Santa Monica.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, you feel like a bluebird's going to fall on your shoulder.
Right. I went to the Santa Monica Pier, walked on that. All that was cool. And like I had heard these stories about these clubs on the Sunset Strip, like Whiskey A Go Go and, the Viper Room. And I went to all them, and they were like closing down at like 11:30, 12 o'clock. And it was just like,
Yeah.
this is not what I had built up in my head. This was going to be.
My
Um,
roommate and I think I sent you, I wrote a screenplay called The Philly Kid. It was a mixed martial arts film, and he was a learned screenwriter. He told me, he said, LA, it's tough to get a pulse and a vibe from where you're living. When you're in Cincinnati, for instance, that there's a pulse, there's a
right.
culture. Even in Cleveland, I did Judas and the Black Messiah with Daniel Kaluuya. It won an Academy Award. I played a cop, of course, but I was in Cleveland, and they love their brownies. The Cleveland Browns are like, they
Oh
can
yeah.
win one game and they just love them. LA, you don't get that pulse. You get a
Yeah.
bunch of different people from all over. Anyway, that roommate went on to write 21 Bridges, and it made 50 million.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I've been around people who have really succeeded. The little girl that brought me to New York City, she married a kid named he's known for The Bear, Jeremy Allen White, who just won a Golden Globe for The Bear. So my story is really like, when I went to New York City, Vincent D'Onofrio became my teacher. I don't like to think I was a very lucky guy. I worked for everything in sports, But when it came to acting, and when I finally got over the fear of what people laughing at me, for committing to it, I kind of fell into a rabbit hole of really talented people who were doing it.
Right.
And I was able to just commit my sports knowledge to acting, which is different for a lot of people. There are a lot of people in Los Angeles that go there looking a certain way and they don't do the work. They don't sit in an acting class for 3 years learning how to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like a sport for a guy like Jake Gyllenhaal, but he's lucky he had a producer father. But well, it is what it is. He
Yeah.
does do the work. That guy does definitely do the work.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that is something because, like, I try to even tell my son now, I'm like, because, all of his friends are, 16 around that age or 17. And a lot of them know that I have a YouTube show and they'll all say, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to do a show? And I'm like, why don't you do something? I was like, you know how to do a podcast, but do something. And he's like, I'd be embarrassed. And I'm like, who gives a shit about what people
Right.
think? You start something now. By the time you get out of school or by the time you graduate, like, who knows what it could be? I'm like, the perfect example are these Paul brothers. I mean, like, they started literally on Vine, like just doing dumb shit. And fast forward, it's been a lot of ups and downs in the middle, but fast forward however many years it is since they started, one of them, like him or not, has rejuvenated boxing because let's be
100%.
honest, boxing was dead in the water.
100%.
You had Tyson Fury and Wilder was like the biggest heavyweight fight that I can remember in a long time. And, Mayweather had since retired. I mean, there was really no big draw. And Jake Paul, a YouTube star, has hands down, I would give him this credit, has revitalized the sport of boxing. And his brother Logan is killing it in WWE right now. He's a hell of an athlete. I've
He
watched some of
sure
his
is. They both are. They both are. I mean, you have to read between the lines with humanity. I mean, I taught at a university and yes, it was acting, but the cool thing about being an actor is you delve into your empathy for humans.
yes.
And when you look at a guy like Jake Gyllenhaal and you look at his brother, I hearken back to the Naked Cowboy brother. I was very good friends with him. I rode a pedicab in New York City, and my friend, we went on an open call. Three of them. We went to see Martin Scorsese at the open call at some church up on the Upper West Side for The Departed. Three of them got contract roles because they looked so like I was always the young guy in my groups. I always hung with guys that were more life experienced street guys, and they were New York street guys from the West Side Hell's Kitchen. And they went on this call and they got cast. Scorsese loved them so much they became the new crew that throws off DiCaprio when they're in the bar. He's like, these are my
Yeah.
new guys. Those were all my friends from my acting class. And they said to me, they're like, look at the Naked Cowboy. He's not spending money on acting classes. He's not, you know what I mean? Like that dude makes hundreds of thousands who knows, maybe millions. And he
Yeah.
just created this thing. And that's what there's something to be said for doing that, for having the courage to do that. And yes, they're kind of corny, but at the end of the day, both of those guys are athletes. They're really good athletes.
Yeah. Yeah. They're doing great. And you just have to give them props for changing with the times. And I think especially now more than ever with technology, you have to be able to change with the time to figure out where you're going to go. And I think they knew that the YouTube stuff had a ceiling, at least for them. So they had to branch out into other stuff. And Jake went boxing, Logan went, he did box as well. I think both of them started out with that boxing match. Logan lost his first one, then he fought Floyd and he lost that one. But still, like, what an honor to get to fight Floyd anyway. Like,
Yeah.
even if
Yeah.
he
He
lose,
did well.
he did okay. And I think Floyd probably held off the gas, a little bit, but still,
100%.
that they have to learn the next thing. And I think that's always it's hard enough to find the one thing, but then when you find that, you already have to be searching for the next thing that you can do, especially in that type of industry, because I think everything has a shelf life. That's why in the podcast, I put it in crime and entertainment. I didn't want to get boxed in just with true crime, although I love true crime and it's a passion. I like talking about it. I had to put the entertainment aspect on there because that opens the door to really anything else.
100%.
It
Yeah.
was, it was kind of forward thinking. At least the name come about by accident, but it worked because then I'm able to talk with everybody, such as actors and producers and writers, and that was what opened me to the door to be able to talk to Tom. I want to talk a little bit about the documentary that you were talking about with him. How did that whole thing come about with you doing the
So when I
documentary?
told you I was a writer, when we talk about the Paul brothers, I always have been, because I was a sportsman. Like, I was one of the best linebackers in the state of Pennsylvania, and if you know, state of Pennsylvania in football is like Texas.
Yeah.
It's a very competitive. We have four from my hometown, four NFL coaches from my hometown that coached in my high school area. There were 20,000 people at a game, and I was the first 4-year starter in my town, hold tackling records for my high school. But at the end of the day, I just had this itching to get on stage because I'm musical. I sing first more than I had done acting. And I'm the type of guy, if I see somebody like a Jake Gyllenhaal thriving at it, I'm gonna figure out a way to do it, because it was never. Some people watch. Some people like to watch John Wayne. Some people can emulate John Wayne. You know what I mean? And that was me. I see things and I want to do it. Like, we were talking about Action Park. I jumped off all those cliffs as a kid, because I will not turn down a challenge, right? And that's how I approach acting. And I mean, really, test my resolve, see if I can't. Tell me I can't do it, I'm going to do it. So at the end of the day, I wrote this screenplay called The Philly Kid. It got picked up by Warner Brothers. I left Los Angeles. I was in a police academy, a real one, in Philadelphia. I'm in week 18, kind of healing from a broken relationship. First one. I'm 32 years old, thinking about my life. I was going to continue acting because I had done it for 9 years, but I wanted to get a real big boy job in addition to. And I had seen cops go on auditions with their uniforms. So my roommate calls me. He says, "Hey, Warner Brothers just put out $1 million to start casting The Philly Kid. I'm sending you a $3,000 story by check and a contract that you need to sign within 24 hours, or they're going to move on to the next screenplay." And I had spent $5,000 being in the academy. You ask me how I met Tom. This is kind of the long and the short. So this was something that pulled me. The fact that I made $3,000 off a story that came from my cranium, I started writing again. In addition to the first audition I went on from the academy was Boardwalk Empire, and I wind up getting it. I played Steve Buscemi hires me to kill off Chalky White. I went in with my academy uniform. I had been in there 15 times. This time I had a real uniform. They hired me on the spot, and Chalky White, Michael K. Williams, God rest his soul, choked me out with an American flag in episode 4. It's called White Horse Pike. But like, those were the type of things you go through pain and you go through experience and you get somewhere. And with the writing, I realized if something comes along again, I'm going to write it. And when I worked with Tom on an independent film, I had a screenplay I met a guy named Mark McGraw on New Jersey Transit. I was going in for an SVU audition for a firefighter. This dude sitting there on New Jersey Transit train with a script. I had a script. We got off at Penn Station. He hands me a card. On the card, it says McGraw. I said, "Like Tim?" He said, "Yes, he's my brother." I said, "No shit." "Yeah, he's my brother." So we become friends. He's a bartender in Philadelphia. He starts telling me this story about Tim McGraw not knowing his father was the World Series pitcher for the Phillies. And he had a poster of this guy in his bedroom because he was a baseball fan. Up until that point, his name was Smith. He found out his name was McGraw. He discovered his birth certificate in his mother's bedroom in Louisiana that said McGraw on it. And he told his mom what's going on, and she said, "Yes, I had a one-night stand with this guy. He's the World Series pitcher for the Phillies." And that's the story. And I started fantasizing as a writer how I'm going to 3-act structure this thing. And when I met Tom, I had already had it done. And Tom was like in recovery, doing well, looked healthy. And I said, "I have a screenplay that I think you're perfect for." And I had just done a Kickstarter campaign. I raised $20,000 for it. So lo and behold, now I have $2,500 to give him to attach him to my screenplay. And he was all for it. He got me in touch with his manager, a guy named Charles, who was a cop in London for 30 years, who reps, broken down actors and resurrects their careers. He was doing this for Tom at the time. Tom was on The Shooter, the Mark Wahlberg series at the time.
Yeah.
And within 2 months of me giving him this $2,500, he ran over a stuntman. So I was trying to entice investors. I wasn't trying to get this money, right? I'm thinking like a producer. I'm going to get this guy to play the father. I changed it to, what if Hank Williams Jr. didn't know Hank Williams Sr. was his father and they meet on the road? The kid's a busker from the street of Philadelphia. He gets famous through some viral video. Same thing, trying to think
Yeah.
outside of the box. And he meets his father on the road. The father's down and out. He's trying to get back into the limelight through his kid who didn't know he was his dad. That's the story. And Tom loved it. And he pitched it to Charles. Charles was his manager. He loved it. So then Tom gets arrested after the shooter. Fast forward to COVID. We're still trying to get this screenplay made, me and his manager, because his manager loves it. He said, Adam, let me tell you something. Documentaries right now are all the rage. I know you've raised money before. Let's do one on Tom. I said, Charles, you're right. Let's do a finance package. I'll put it out to my hometown. We'll see what happens. And lo and behold, I raised I'll hit up my rugby buddies that I played rugby with in college and high school, and they put up about 60 between them. And then it just started rolling. Once somebody sees the first investor jump on, then you start making a movie. And that the rest is kind of history. It's taken 3.5. We have a finished documentary. They're coloring it right now, but it's a 2-part docuseries, and we're trying to aim for Netflix. It does have interest. We have Heidi Fleiss on tape, Dr. Drew, Tom, his ex-wife, Maeve Quinlan, a bunch of people that Robert Lasardo, who you interviewed, and he did a bunch of indie films with Tom. But his children, we did a celebration of life. We obviously, I sent you the 10-minute clip. We have a lot of really dark footage, but we also have some humor because he was a very funny guy. He could tell a story that would make you tear up.
Oh yeah, I mean, I want to, again, like you said, rest in peace to Tom. And I know he had a lot of battles and a lot of struggles throughout his life. But I could tell just in our interview how you could like him. Like, he was such a likable person. And there's some people I think that, once they do the same thing once or twice, you're just like, that guy will never learn, or whatever the case may be. I've had those people in my life. It seems like Tom would be that guy that would just be so difficult you couldn't turn away from because he is such a likable guy.
He was the epitome, and I'm not a doctor or a psychiatrist, but I do know, having been in a fellowship for all these 25 years, he was very sick, man, and I loved him to death. And it was like being around kin. It killed me the week that I spent with him doing these interviews, and you'll see it eventually. It's a marketable piece, and it's going to bring people to tears because he was a very likable guy. But there were times driving over, if he wasn't medicated, where he'd be saying some things that, his ex-wife said that he would do in Saving Private Ryan. He rubbed people the wrong way. He was rude because he would try to get a rise out of you and see if you wanted to fight him. He would do those types of things to make certain elements of the situation uncomfortable because he was uncomfortable sober. And that's the epitome of what it is to be a sober alcoholic or addict. You know what I mean?
Okay.
He would say things that were so, for me, being sober as long as I have, you start to not want to talk to the street guys after a while because you start talking like it. And then all of a sudden you start getting mannerisms that are the same as when you were a kid, the things that you tried to unlearn when you got sober. Yeah. And so it was difficult. I spent a whole week with him in Sacramento, and I watched the guy dip out to the bathroom 30 times a session. And then he would come back and he'd be nodding out, sweating, eyes glossed over, saying remarkable things and telling the truth for the most part. But then asked me if he was better when he came out of the bathroom. I'm like, I guess. He tried to buy me food. I was the producer. I said, we're not doing like that. Those types of things. It was he had a heart of gold.
Yeah.
And he called me at like 4 a.m. He was in the hotel room below me. And then he would forget that he did it. He left burn marks in the hotel room. The cops had to come. Unfortunately for them, he was out of the jurisdiction. But it was sad to see, and I knew exactly what was going to happen. And as much as you want to save somebody, and I came up with the title Saving Sizemore, which is an oxymoron at this point because there was no saving him. He couldn't. You can only try. They need to be willing. It was one of those stories that, unfortunately, I tried, and his manager had seen him go through 18 rehabs alone, and I think everybody was pretty worn out. And his brother was I filmed him interviewing his brother, talking to him on the phone, and his brother took his own life in the middle of doing the document. It's a pretty heavy documentary, and I'm
Oh,
excited for everybody to see it because I think it really reveals what not to do when you have success. Success scares the shit out of me for that very reason.
mhm.
Um, I don't consider myself an addict, but I do say to my friends who know me as the person who used to drink, the success is what scares me the most, like massive success, because that's
Right.
when you have to watch your ass if you're a dysfunctioning alcoholic or addict, in my opinion.
And the way he broke it down to me, and again, I'm just relaying how he put this to me. I can't say it's 100% true, but it makes sense because he would tell me that he never got high while he was filming, at least not in the the twilight era of his career, like around Saving Private Ryan and Heat. But because he said being on the set with guys like Michael Mann, Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Val Kilmer, Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg production, that was the high that he needed. That was the high to
100%.
satisfy him. However, once filming is done, because people that don't act, and I'm not an actor either, so I had to listen to him break it down. He's like, you wrap a movie. He's like, that movie's not going to come out for a year and a half, maybe 2 years. He's like, it might not work for 6.5, 8 months.
Right.
He was like, so you go from the most adrenaline packed fun time to nothing.
Right.
So what do you do to get yourself back to that? And he was like, for me, that was where I turned to drugs. And he was like, I would stay on there to keep that high until somebody called and said, hey, Tom, we got another movie for you. And then he was able to get off and go back and do the movie. Now, I think as time progressed and time went on, it probably became harder to make that switch and to cut it off. I think that would just be a natural influx of, living. It's going to get harder to stop that.
Yeah, we had this very conversation on camera, and I'm just gonna, I'm not educating you. I think he was so interesting, man. He chose to be with Heidi Fleiss. Heidi
Yeah.
Fleiss was like something that he's like, you know what? I don't care what people think, and he had people coming up to him in the Viper room saying, "How does it feel to know that this woman's been with every dude in this room?" And Tom would punch him in their face. He
Yeah.
was just he did not live by the status quo of the A-lister, and that's why I love the guy, because I can't stand that place either.
Yeah.
And but what he said was, when it went south with Heidi and she was on the Stern show after Black Hawk Down, the work was taken from him, and he had money and he had no work to go to, and it was taken from him for a long time. So that was the levels that we're talking about. You're kind of functioning. You stay high, but if you don't have any work, he went from making $2 million, which I believed he was one of the highest grossing actors in the early 2000s, late 90s, to
Yeah.
nothing for a very long time. And he had that money to keep himself high with. It's. So then you see him dating the woman that left him for Hugh Grant. I think it was a British actress. I forget her name. To go into, slumming a little bit, if you will,
Yeah.
for lack
And
of better terms.
and it's just a horrible to see somebody with this skill set do that. Cause like you said, Black Hawk Down, Saving Private Ryan, Natural Born Killers. I mean, he was in a ton of stuff. Even the one that, what was the movie? The Relic, where they had that
Yeah,
thing that comes alive or whatever. I mean, just so much stuff. And he was great. He could carry a movie. He had that look, that bravado that he was that quintessential, I guess, my age of, movie watching. He was that, Hollywood bad boy at the time. Every era's got one. And I think
yeah.
he was that Hollywood bad boy at the time.
It's funny. Tom had an uncle that was kind of criminal, like a real tough guy himself in Detroit. And it's funny. He always wore Michigan. He was a big football fan. He knew every single stat of every single player that went through Michigan, and it was just a photographic memory. And he credited a lot of his blue collar tough guy stuff to his uncle. His dad was a Harvard professor. Tom was an intellect. He was a very smart guy, but he could hang with anybody. I mean, he loved the hood, and the hood loved him right back. It's
Yeah.
very interesting. Devil with a Blue Dress was the one I quoted
Yeah.
when we did an interview. I said, dude, you
Yeah.
upstaged the greatest actor on planet Earth in
Yeah.
Denzel Washington. He said, I didn't think I did that well. And he was humble too when he wanted to be. Tom was very humble.
Yeah.
He told me he didn't like Devil with a Blue Dress. I said, I loved it because he had this huge face. So I'm going to
Yeah.
just tell you, when I did that indie film with Tom in Brooklyn, he was the only actor, Jake Gyllenhaal included, where I got starstruck doing a scene in the middle of the scene as I'm trading lines with the guy. And you knew what a movie star really looked like because they got these big faces and these big expressive eyes. And I'm looking down and his eyes are looking at me. And he gave me lines. He told the director, let me use him because I was playing his deputy. There's a murder scene. Kid actually takes his life in the scene. And Tom's using me, telling me to get the bus. And it was so real. And yeah, and right after that, he tried to hook me up with his assistant. I'm like, I'm married, but he was just such a giving human, constantly making people laugh. He couldn't sit still. He needed people to be entertained, even
Yeah.
when he wasn't getting paid. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he was just that kind of guy that always was. I think that line fit him so well. The action is the juice from Heat. We talked
Yes.
about the impact that line hit. And I think that just kind of more or less, even though it was perfect for his character in the movie, I think that was, almost his mantra for real life. Like the
Yeah.
action was the juice. And then, like you said, when the action isn't there, you find that satisfaction elsewhere. And he shared a story where he said Robert De Niro came and got him and basically took him to rehab. And he was like, a lot of people may want to argue this. He's like, but I have the privilege of calling Robert De Niro a friend. And he's like, he's a better friend than he is an actor. He's like, so let that sink in.
Yeah.
And kind of spoke volumes of where it was. And he was humble with me on a couple of movies. We were talking about, and it's not the greatest movie. I mean, it wasn't going to win any awards, but he said he only did it because he wanted to work with Mickey Rourke, and that was Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man.
Yeah, it is not the greatest movie, but I'm a huge Mickey Rourke fan.
I am too. And also Don Johnson. And so it's like one of the movies that, like, I'm not going to go seek out to watch Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man.
You know what's funny?
30 at Cinemax, I'm going to finish it.
You know what's funny, Wade? It's one, like, next to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It's one of the best titles of all times.
Oh yeah,
It's Boondock Saints. It's got that type of title, It's
Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man. It's like it had potential. I think if they just tweaked that whole, who was it? Baldwin, one of the Baldwin brothers was like the bad guy in there.
Steven?
And wore fucking trench leather coats, and it was a little campy. But even with that particular kind of setting, Tom still worked his role. Like
100%. He was a blue collar, roll up your sleeves, get it done, work, roll around in the mud. And the kid I'm in the St. Michael of the City with, he did a film with him. He kind of put him on the map. It's called Bad Frank. And I actually, St. Michael of the City came because Kevin Interdonato, who's in the movie St. Michael of the City, that wrote it, he knew I raised the capital for the documentary, and we had Tom in common. So literally, I thought I got lucky with this documentary raising this money. And then I said, I'm trying to get this other film I told you about with the street performer off the ground all these years. And he said, read my script. It's linear. It moves. It doesn't have any music, but it's violent, kind of like State of Grace. I said, I love that movie, State of Grace. Let me read it. Read it in a night. I said, all right, give me a finance package. I said the same exact thing I did with Tom's documentary. And lo and behold, I raised right around 100K right away. So I've had a really good 2.5 years here. And to get back to Tom before I forget, because you're going to like this story, I'm going bald. And he called my mother. He said, Tom was such a giving person. He called my mother and told me where to go in Mexico to get a $3,000 hair transplant. I had him on speakerphone. He's talking to my mom. You don't want your son to be bald, do you? He's too good looking. He's too damn good looking. He's a piece of ass.
That sounded just like him, the way he talked.
So I was going to ask you, when you did your interview with him, was he in the bathroom?
The first one he was in there.
Yeah.
He didn't realize that's where he was at to start with.
That's his safe haven.
He had to take a break And when he got up and left, I could see that he was like not like sitting on the toilet, but that's what he was using to sit on. I was just like, he's in a bathroom. And
Yes.
the second one, when he come back, because we actually done 2 parts. Like, I typically don't, especially if it's like, I consider Tom a celebrity.
He was
Somebody
a
like
celebrity.
that.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't like to keep them more than an hour 10, unless I get the vibe that they're having fun and they want to stay. But
Yeah.
usually, we're ready to wrap it up about that time. We're like maybe an hour, hour and 15. I was so close to wrapping it up. And I was like, there's so much stuff I wanted to cover, but I hate to keep him. We did have
Mm.
good conversations. We talked a lot about Heat and how he was telling me how they were trained by all these professionals, and how the scene where they're doing the shootout in the street, that I think he said the SEALs use Val Kilmer's magazine change for how to change your magazine during a firefight. I mean, just great stuff. And I'm a minute or two away from just wrapping it up. And, and he's like, wait, he said, if you don't mind, he's like, can we finish this another time? He's like, I'm having a good time. He's like, I'm just really tired. He's like, but I want to continue this. And I'm like, sure, that's no problem. So we cut it off, and what in the middle of that, I don't know who he was living with at the time, but they brought him in some food, and he was eating the food while he was doing it. And I'm like, all right, Tom, I'm going to let you finish that, and then we'll get back to it, because that may disturb the audio a little bit. And so there is a little bit of like where he said he was done, but he would still sneak in a bite every now and then, and you could hear a bit. But it took about a month to get back for the second part. I was so afraid that we weren't going to be able to finish it. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to wrap that up, because we kind of ended it, abruptly. And finally, it was like, I think he had some issues going on with one of his sons. Cause he would call me every time. It's not like he would ghost me. Whether it was a 100%, what was going on is another story, but he would say, man, I got this going on. Can we reschedule? Push it back an hour, push it back 2 hours. And obviously, it's Tom Sizemore. I'm gonna do whatever he asks. And then finally, it was like a day before Thanksgiving. I was actually in my situation that I had going on, so I couldn't leave my house. And my
Mm.
family was gone. It was just me. And he was like, "You're not going anywhere for Thanksgiving?" And I didn't tell him about what I had going on at the time. And I was just like, "No, my family's gonna go. I'll be here. We'll have all night. Whenever we can go at 10 o'clock. Whatever's good for you." And we lined it up, and we done like another 2.5 hours. So altogether, it's like close to 4 hours of content. Now that time he was sitting in his bedroom. But he was much more relaxed. I feel like in that one, we talked everything, man. We talked politics. We talked how Marvel, in our opinion, was kind of destroying the movie business,
Yeah.
everything going, all that. We talked about the COVID vaccine that he had to take to keep working. We mentioned the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict and gave our thoughts on that, as well as the Ahmaud Arbery situation. We talked about the Gotti movie, where he got a lot of Gotti tapes from the Ravenite, from the actual, FBI surveillance. He got to actually speak with John Gotti on the phone, because he played him in Robert De Niro's movie Witness to the Mob.
Mm.
It was so good. It was like, generally, that's the first time I could probably say since I've been doing this that it didn't even feel like a podcast. It talked to me it was like I really just had a conversation with an actor and was picking his brain.
Yeah, and the fascinating part about it is the most interesting stuff that he would tell you that you wouldn't know if he was weaving a tapestry of bullshit or not.
Yeah.
Most of the time, if he was saying he hung with Kurt Cobain and started Kurt Cobain, on heroin, or Kurt Cobain asked him for heroin, probably happened. But then he would tell you something else that you'd be like, it would be the most mundane bullshit story that didn't mean anything. And he was a compulsive liar for no reason a lot of the time. And it was bizarre to me. But like my manager, he told people he was always carrying a gun, and you better watch out for. He's this little guy that wouldn't hurt a fly, literally would not hurt a bug, not step on an ant. And he called his manager, the guy that brought down Jack the Ripper in London, for instance.
Yeah.
bad motherfucker. You don't want to mess with Charles. So we went in there, we got a gun, and this guy's going down on my wife, and Charles says, we're next. Meanwhile, Charles is gay. And then the guys jump out of the window, and I start shooting out the window, and then Charles shoots him through the window too. And then that was it. And the door was just sitting there ajar. And my wife is so hot, she's so high, she looks, what are you doing here? Like, whether or not that happens, he was really, really good at telling stories, man. Really good.
He was. You sounded just like him when he talked. And I didn't get too deep into it, but
I lived with the guy for 3 years, man. Like, literally not live with him, but like we talked, text message. He thanked me for this documentary. It was supposed to be the one that resurrected everything. And when I saw what was going on with him, being a sober man in good conscience, I didn't want to exploit that. And I said to my partner, the trajectory of what this needs to change. I don't care how many rehabs he did. And I just say that on your show. I need to say that for my own state of mind, because there's going to be a lot of yin and yang with the doc. God willing, it comes out. But I had to take a step back from it creatively because I wanted it to just be what it is. You know, I went to school for it. I did communications media, which documentaries are part of it. You just tell the story and see where it goes. You know, his brother killed himself. Tom was sick. He was not sober. I've had nightmares about it. What could I have done differently? I'm just one guy, but there were a lot of people in his path that cared about him and would text him, take care of yourself. Yeah. Charles needed him to stay alive, not because I don't think he was getting rich from Tom. I just think that he knew that he probably didn't have another recovery in him. So that's where we went this way and that, you know what I mean? For me, as long as you got breath in your lungs, there's a chance.
Yeah.
But I'm the young guy in this situation. I couldn't change it. We talked sports. That was our safe spot. Yeah. The last time we talked about the Eagles in the Super Bowl, and Tom went to Temple University for graduate school for theater. And that's right next to me. I live 20 minutes from there. And he talked about the Eagles, and I said, I'm trying to get this documentary done. And the last thing he said to me, Wade, I shit you not, I have the text, we'll get it done. I know you get things done, Adam. We will get it done. And that was it. He died about 2 weeks later. Yep.
Wow. Yeah, he talked sports with me a little bit too. Big Detroit guy. He was spitting out a lot of players' names. I want to say there was a guy that was playing tight end, Will Disley, or he might have been playing for Seattle, but maybe he was from Michigan. He knew him. I knew him just because I had recently put like a prop bet on him scoring the first touchdown. So when he was like, you know who that is? And I'm like, oh yeah, I know who that is. So that you could tell like that really excited him. And even after the interview, like I would text him here and there and he would tell me, he was like, hey bro, he said, I got a real, good movie. He's like, I think this is going to be really good for my career. I think it's going to kind of throw me back in the limelight, where he was like, he was a cop going somewhere like in an abandoned hospital. He never told me the name of it.
That's the one that I got him on.
Okay. Yeah. So he was really excited about that one.
Yeah. Called Imperatus. It was the movie that we started doing a documentary, and the third investor from my hometown was doing $1 million movie at the Pennhurst Asylum called Imperatus. And he hired Tom, which we're using some of the footage from that film, and some of the story that I just told you about the guy jumping through the window is from the backstage, like him telling the makeup artist. And it's a funny story. I could send it to you, but it's pretty graphic in detail. But the guy was just so entertaining. And my mother said there's footage of us playing music because I play guitar, and he's singing Oasis Wonderwall with me.
Yeah.
And he was having fun right up until the end. He didn't want to get sober. There was just not a will there for him to get clean and sober. And unfortunately, that's just the way. You can't live that way for that long. It's 30 some odd years. And everybody that we discussed, this guy called. When he was on his deathbed, Stallone called, Scorsese called, Steven Spielberg was paying his medical bills as he was on his deathbed. It was wild. The New York Times called, asked about the documentary. So, right before you and I got on, one of my investors said, this 10-minute clip I sent you, he said, I think this is finally going to get done. So, if your audience is praying, there's a lot of people that could stand to learn a lot about a very fascinating person. He was one of the very best actors, I think, in the last 30 years, at least.
Oh yeah, hands down. Just kind of like what we mentioned earlier, to be able to outshine a bad script, bad plot line, and still show your acting chops. That's difficult for some actors to overcome. They kind of get swallowed up in the whole bad movie experience, and they can even know it's bad. I mean, like I said, he said, he even told me, because he was like, "What'd you think of that movie?" We were talking about it. He was like, "I was like, it's all right. It's one of the movies, for guys who like guys." And he looked at me. He was like, "That movie was bad, bro." He was like, "I only did it because I wanted to work with Mickey." He's like, "That movie was bad." but,
That's
but
what he said about Devil in the Blue Dress to me. I thought he was great in it.
no, I
I
thought he
like
was wonderful in that.
I like period pieces. So anybody that comes in with that, like, old school hat, like,
Yeah.
where, so I like that shoot 'em up, the old big guns. What are those called?
Tommy guns. Tommy guns.
Tommy guns. Yeah. He
Yeah.
was great, man. I mean, as soon as he walked in the room, you couldn't take your eyes off. The thing that he taught actors, he came to my acting class. I like the black girl. I'm going to come back and teach her. I really like her. Make sure she's there. Well, he said it could be as real as you want. And that's what Vincent taught. Vincent D'Onofrio was my teacher. And he said, acting is you, all of your idiosyncrasies, your insecurities, all your vulnerabilities in the character circumstances. Speaking in your own voice, making sure you're listening organically and reacting. And Tom would tell me that's everything. Here's what you need to add to it, though. It can be as real as possible. It needs to be fucking entertaining.
Yeah.
And he was always entertaining. You know what I mean? He could say something like, "Yeah, shut up, Slick," and you would be like, "Yeah, that shit." It felt icky the way he told that dude to shut up in Heat, right?
Yeah.
He meant it, like, "Shut up, Slick. I don't want to talk to you."
Just keep your mouth shut, Slick. Even bit parts, like I remember he was in, and we talked about it. I recited the line that he said, and he got a kick out of it that I remembered the line. And he's not even really known for this movie, but Point Break, he had
Yeah,
like a little cameo in Point Break when they busted
there's
the
two
wrong.
keys.
Yeah, he's like, "Two keys, uncut. I've been following these fuckers for 3 months." And I mean, it was just, I was reciting the lines that he said, and he was just like, he said, "Wow." He said, "You remember that movie?" Huh? I said, "Oh yeah." I said, "I love that movie." And I was like, I said, "I don't know why you didn't have such a big part." And I think he said he did it for like a favor. I don't even know if he was credited in. He said it was, I don't know if Catherine Bigelow done that. He done it. He just said he done it as a favor. He was in the
Yeah.
area. He showed up and done it as a favor just to be on the film. He said, "I thought the film was going to do well. My face is in it. Obviously that would."
The cool thing about Tom is he was really encouraging to guys like me, guys that have made money at it. I had a recurring on a series, a $200 million series called Invasion. Tom would ask to see your demo. He would do the research on people that weren't known, like myself. Shit, he watched my football highlight film and cried in front of me because I felt like he knew the end was coming. I really do. We were 8 o'clock in the morning in the hotel watching my highlight film when I played linebacker and was like one of the best in the state. Literally cried. You were far and away one of the best players on the field. But like with the acting, he was just so encouraging. And when he died, there were a lot of people came out of the woodwork. Academy Award-winning directors. The guy that wrote Joker came out and said, "Tom encouraged the shit out of me." He was just that graceful with his heart. There's not a lot of people like that in this industry. And I'm learning that, having raised money, being in charge of sending out paychecks, people don't generally say thank you, let alone, praise you as far as a performer or encourage you. It's a rat race. It's cutthroat. And he just wasn't that guy. He had no interest in learning how to be a producer. He was just the guy that once he started to create a character, he came alive in front of your eyes. And he did a De Niro impression that blew my mind. It was so good. And he was high at the time. I mean, literally halfway through the impression, he's like nodding out, and I'm holding his hand, trying to wake him up. Oh
He
man,
was like, even at the end of our, when we finally did wrap it up on the second session, he told me, he was like, he said, "Wade," he said, "I want to thank you." He's like, "Believe it or not," he said, "I don't like talking to people." And he said, "I
yeah.
don't really enjoy doing these things." He said, "But you've made this fun." He's like, "So it's been enjoyable." And he's like, "You're really good at it. And, I want to tell you, thank you for having me on." And it meant a lot. It could have been a bullshit lie. I don't know. He could
No,
have thought it was fucking
it
horrible.
wasn't. It
Lie.
wasn't. What he is lonely, and he was an introvert. And you're talking to a guy that studied him for the last 3 years of his life. I met him 13 years ago. But my partner and I only stopped talking to each other 6 months ago, and my son's asking for food. So at the end of the day, it was I'm somebody that like gets obsessed about learning what the pupil is or learning what the subject is, and Tom was just easy to get to know.
Mhm.
Again, man, like just felt like kin. I know that you're a blue collar guy. He was from blue collar town. He was, he had a ton of family. I'm in touch with his son. His son is now doing really well. One didn't want anything to do with dad, and he did an interview, and he had a little bit of a resentment. The other was just like Tom. His name's Jaden. I think he probably spoke to you about Jaden.
Yeah.
Jaden's doing well. He reaches out from time to time, but we follow each other. They're twins, and they had a rough go of it, man. They lived with him in the loft downtown Los Angeles, and a lot of heavy stuff was happening. But Tom loved those kids. I think Tom came from an abusive household. Again, it's all going to come out in the documentary, but for where he came from, he was one of those unicorn actors that went on his first 3 auditions and got all 3.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And one of them was Born on the 4th of July, Oliver Stone film. And at the time he started, I think he met the woman from Sopranos, the wife of Tony Soprano.
Edie Falco.
Edie Falco was his girlfriend. He tells the whole story about meeting her. He does a great impression of her. His life was just, he was a star, man. And it made me realize what a star is. And it actually took the pressure. It took the pressure off of a guy like me who's I got a lot of creativeness, but I'm like Sylvester Stallone. If he has talent, his work ethic is greater than his talent. There's people like that. Yeah. Tom's talent was as great as his work ethic. It was in alignment. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But he could pull some women too, bro. Like he has to be. If you just look, like when I was trying to figure out like what photo I was going to use for the thumbnail, and it was going through and it would show him on these red carpets. It was like every red carpet was a different woman. I mean, he could pull some women.
Yeah, no, he was just compelling, like a total chameleon. But like, we all saw, I read his book. There was a lot of honesty in his book. He was very lovable, man. I read Rob Lowe's book, and it talked about Tom calling him in the middle of the night, saying his lower extremities were in a dumpster down the alleyway at the last bar he was at. That's how high he was. And Rob Lowe was sober at the time, and it was like the wake up call that he needed because he didn't want to be that. But for the grace of God, there go I type of situation. I've had those. I've had them with people that are friends. I've had them with family. And but like, it's just a testament to who he is as a person, that somebody like Rob Lowe would write about him in his book because people cared. They weren't there at the end though, because he could be nasty, dude. He really could. And it's kind of where I was at with it. It's like, if I'm going to document something, I got to tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. Right. So what I hope is that we all see. I had to take I had to take a step back creatively. Like I said, I think it's all going to be there. We have again 90 hours of footage. But if it comes out, it'll be a success. I know that because I've seen all the footage. Just don't know what's going to be used.
I don't think there's no way that it couldn't be looked upon as a great documentary because it's such a cautionary tale. And I think that is what America is hinging on. I mean, true crime is obviously, top of the line right now. Everybody loves true crime. But then when it comes to, biographies and documentaries, those are next in line. And you have Tom's like rise and then fall. And you wanted to see that rise again out of him.
I did. We all did.
Yep. And I think that's what will be the draw to everybody watching this film, because just in that teaser you sent me, it'll make you smile. 10-minute teaser. It'll make you smile and it'll make you damn near want to cry because you see what he's going through. You see how hard he's battling, but you also see the good person that he is and the good heart that he had. So it's when you have something that can tug at your heartstrings like that, and then at the same time make you smile, you're working with something wonderful.
Yeah, and I spoken like a true gentleman and a scholar. I couldn't have said it any better, and that's kind of where my heart is at now. It's like I've been through the ringer of it. It emotionally aged me, mentally, physically, spiritually, because I did care, and I've had journalists, thank God, because I worked at NBC 10, people that I stayed in contact with that had careers say to me, like, dude, that's part of being a documentarian. Like, you're going to get in there, and um, there's plays based on like the Kennedys that were washed up that lived in I forget the name of the play, but there's people that run out of wealth, and they live in the dredges of society. And the fall from grace story is something that people, the dirty laundry, unfortunately, is something people can't take their eyes off, especially the shinier the star. You know what I mean? And he was definitely that. When you say he could pull some women, he could. And at the end of it, he was just happy to have somebody to talk to on a podcast because he was lonely,
Yeah.
And I
Well,
was that guy as well, brother.
I felt blessed to be able to have him on my show. He was probably at the time, he's still, to this day is one of the biggest stars, probably the biggest star that I've ever had on here. Tommy Chong is definitely up there. Robert Lasardo is definitely up there. But as far as like, Sizemore's just been in box office smashes, like we've talked about earlier. And, not a backseat player. He's right up there, top billing. And so he was hands down the biggest celebrity guest that I'd had on here. And it meant so much to me that he did take that much time and talk. And it really was the first, like I said, episode to where it didn't feel like we were doing a podcast. It felt like we bumped into each other at a bar. I was just talking to him and he was talking back. That's what it felt like. And
Yeah,
it was
two guys just bullshitting. Yeah, and for anybody that might misconstrue like where I wanted to go with it, as much as I like to tell the truth, painstaking truth, it's the truth when you say it's a message. The fall from grace is a message to people who have talent and will seek out fame and get it.
Mm-hmm.
For me, if you leave out the yang, that to the opposite, the yin, whatever the positives are, if you leave out the fall from grace, you're taking away the message, in my opinion. The bad decisions. I mean, I told you several of mine tonight. People aren't comfortable doing that. People don't want people to know that they've slept in back alleyways, or that they've they kissed their best friend's girlfriend at a bar, all that stuff that you do when you're young and stupid. And Tom just had 33 years of it, maybe more, of the progressive disease. And his talent was there to the very end. He worked to the very end, whether it was an independent film, Imperatus, which he was in my hometown. He wanted to come eat Christmas dinner with my family because he was when he was shooting that. He was at the Pennhurst Asylum. My mother-in-law, I said, how much experience have you had with people who use? And then she kind of got quiet. I said, no, we're gonna skip that tonight. I'm gonna go see Tom tomorrow. But I married comparatively a pretty normal family, and I wanted to keep it that way. But yeah, I feel blessed to have had him in my life, and because he was such a shining star. Not only that, there was goodness in him. And like I said, it's hopefully people that are coming in the distant future learn from it. You know what I mean?
And that's the biggest thing, is to being able to learn something from that. And another example that I had, he was actually the first interview I ever did, and it was Lilo Brancato, who played Calogero with Bronx Tale, and then went on to do Crimson Tide. I mean, his first movie, he's acting along Chaz Palminteri, Robert De Niro. Then I think it was what is the Crimson Tide. So he's in there with Gene Hackman, Denzel, James Gandolfini, which he wasn't Tony Soprano at that time. He was just, he was still that kind of medium actor. You knew who he was, but you maybe didn't know his name. And
wait, you want to know what else he was in? He was in Bloodsport. He was in Bloodsport. Yeah, he played the young. He didn't have any lines. He played the young. what's the lead?
Van Damme?
He played the young Van Damme in a flashback.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, I knew he was
My
in
brothers and I,
Renaissance
we like
Man.
that type of thing. What's that?
He was in Renaissance Man with Danny DeVito, and he was in a couple other ones, and then he hit Sopranos in season 2. And he told me like a lot of the scenes in there, he was telling me like specific ones. He's like, when the guy comes to collect the money, give me $1,000. He's like, we were so high in that scene. He was like, I was high in this scene, I was high in that scene. And he said when they were rapping that James Gandolfini, who played Tony, took him, and he was like, he never come out and said it, but like he kind of pulled me off to the side and he looked me in my eye and he was like, you have a gift. And he kind of like pointed at his face and was like, you don't need to waste it. And kind of like telling him without telling him exactly what it is, beating around the bush, being a little, vague, but letting him know like, hey, we can tell you're probably fucked up right now, but you really need to get it together. And he said that meant a lot to him. And he said, obviously he wound up having to learn the hard way. He was addicted to heroin, broke into a guy's house,
Yeah,
knew wasn't home, come out, and unfortunately an off-duty cop wound up getting killed, not by Lilo, but by another guy. And I
yeah,
think Lilo done 13 years in Rikers Island. But to his credit, since he got out, he's done everything the right way. He's tried to make up for the person he was, spread awareness for, drug addiction and things like that. And I was grateful to have him as my first, guest on the podcast. And that's, again, it's just like, you can't just say, hey, you can get in the movies and, everything is all hunky dory, because it's not. And when that happened to him, he told me, he was like, I was so young, I was hitting these, why wouldn't you think it's easy? You come out with a Bronx Tale, Crimson Tide. I mean, you're killing it. And he's like, drugs, women, everything was just, at your fingertips.
yeah,
You didn't have to
accessible.
ask
Yeah.
for anything. And
Wow.
it's easy. If you take anybody and put them in that situation, I think the chances of them going down that rabbit hole, at least to some extent, maybe not all the way to what happened to him, but at least to some extent is very likely. I can see where that happens.
Yeah, no, I thank God every day. I mean, listen, I'm trying to get comfortable with saying, yeah, I'm not an A-lister. I'm not even maybe even a B-pluser, but I've made hundreds of thousands of dollars doing what I do. And there's really 2% of people who have ever done that. There's many people watching that are looking at me like, where have I seen that dude from? Chances are I've been on #2 on Netflix, Manhunt. I play probably one of the workingest cops in television on the East Coast. My resume is very long. You just have to do a little research, but I thank God every day that like I probably wouldn't have lived because I'd have been that type of dude. Show me something that can be abused, and I probably would have abused it early on because I went full speed ahead and in sports, and that's how I treat this. Luckily, I have a family now, which is my saving grace. And I know that you're a dad. It's like your heart outside of your body is what grounds you. No matter how much success you're having monetarily, it's just something that it can't, the joy of what they've brought me. And I lost a child at birth, and my wife and I had a daughter. So I care. It's actually when I started working, which is why I'm a believer, is because whether it was me intuitively that kind of didn't have the fear when I saw that, when I went through that, that was when I started to really feel grounded enough to use my talent in an audition room when we had auditions in rooms as opposed to virtually. And that's when, like, for me, it was like an angel saying, here you go, daddy. I'm going to take less of your pain away. I'm going to take your pain away. Here's some acting jobs. So meeting guys like Tom, he was not the first major movie star that I met. Vincent D'Onofrio was one of them. They were actually friends. And
I met Vince as well at a movie premiere we had in December. Well, I say I was at in December. He was in Silent Partners with a good friend of mine, Sarah DiPaggio, from down there in Florida. And Vincent was a super nice guy as well.
Yeah, he is a super, and he shouted out Vince. I mean, he shouted out Tom. He said he was one of the ones that did it all the way. He went all the way with it. And, those are the types of actors that I want to be around, not people that just want to be on the center cover of magazines and stuff like that. I really like hardworking people, and Vince is one of them. And, listen, 46 is young.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I'm a man. I'm not the right type anymore as far as, but I'm making independent film, and I'm like you. I try to think outside of the box. And you told your story. The more comfortable you get telling your story, the more notoriety you'll get. But it's a fine line. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you don't want that notoriety, right? I mean, so it's
Yeah, and
but
it can come with negativity, but you have to develop a thick skin because, I heard a quote and I put it on my Facebook not too long ago, so I hope I don't butcher it, but it's better to create and be criticized than to create nothing and criticize others.
right. Well,
And
there's another one. Kurt Cobain said, "I'd rather be hated for who I am than loved for who I am not."
right.
You
Yeah.
know,
And it's something
and
along those lines, and that's why, I've had people that's, come at me negative when they hear the story that I have outside of the show. But I mean, that's just part of the deal. And I've had people ask me, "Is like that bother you?" I'm like, "No." And it's kind of like that whole Dion speech from Colorado, after it kind of went viral. And he was like, "Why would somebody else's opinion bother me? Like they don't know
at
me.
this
They don't
point,
know anything about
I mean, when you go through enough pain, you get enough ass whoopings, and like I said, alien tragedy, like I dealt with my wife and I, the heat. I don't necessarily want the heat. You have to, like my mother said, you have to pick your battles and understand what the cost is.
Yeah.
Truthfully, the more true to myself I am, like yourself, when you started telling your story, the more notoriety you got. It's the same with me. The more
Yeah.
comfortable I get in my own skin and start to really like, Vincent pointed at me at 26. I did not believe that I had a skill set. We were 2 a.m. at a smoking bar in downtown New York City, and he said, "There's something very endearing about you. And if you embrace it and you just be yourself in the character circumstances and just start to use who you are and where you come from, you're going to shine." And like, I'm just now starting to get comfortable saying, "Listen, I've made hundreds of thousands of dollars on major movie sets. Am
Yeah.
I a star? No. Do I want to be a star? Not necessarily, but I do want to keep working, which is why I'm sitting on podcasts like guys like yourself who have a story. Your story's remarkable. I told my dad about it today. My dad's a good old boy, man. He goes down to South Carolina, shoots wild hogs and all that shit.
Oh
So
yeah.
he appreciated the story. And I'm glad you told it because you're the one podcaster I've been on with that like had the balls to tell that type of story.
Yeah. And I debated long and hard. Like I never wanted it to seem like I was using that as a launching pad for mine. And so for the first 2 years, nobody ever knew. Like I never mentioned it. The guest I had on didn't know. And as a matter of fact, I was afraid that if they did, they might not want to do it. Um,
That's where I'm at. And
and,
that's the most fascinating part about your story.
and it was kind of like, if I lead off with that, or if they know that, they would be less reluctant to come on. So for the longest time, I didn't do it. And partly too, it was still ongoing. That was my outlet, for
Yeah.
therapy, yes, if you will. And then when it got done, I felt that it was my duty because a part of me was just like, I want to put all this behind me. And then the more I thought about it, I'm like, I feel like I have a duty that I do have this platform now somewhat. Obviously I don't have millions of followers, but I've got a decent amount and a lot of people watch this stuff. If I can at least kind of maybe help one or two people that could possibly find themselves in this situation, at least kind of give out some information about what happened to me, the types of situations people can find themselves in, and maybe it'll help somebody and maybe shed some light on, a situation where you might think somebody done something, but they really didn't. They just didn't have the money to fight it, because
Yeah.
lawyers are expensive, especially good ones. And, had I not been in the situation where I luckily had a pretty decent 401k due to the fact of the company that I was working for, there's a very good chance you and I might not even be having this conversation.
That's what I'm saying. And I appreciated it so much, man, because like, whether you know it or not, I'm telling you a story in real time that's actually killing me. This documentary aged me. It's been a war, and I haven't really disparaged anybody to the best of my ability today because I'm legally not supposed to because there's contracts. But creatively, when you say I'm just gonna be myself from here on out until I'm not here anymore on this earth, because I've seen death up close and personal, like yourself, and that is the only way for me to live. I don't want to live out loud all the time because I don't need the heat that comes with it. But with
Right.
a guy like you, I'm doing a film that is about to have some success, and I need to feed my family, so I need to talk about who I am, and there's a lot of exposure that comes along with that.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting that it's a crime story. I told my dad today. Now I'm talking to all these guys that love these crime stories, and I'm fascinated with them too. I was going to be a cop, you
Yeah.
know, and I'm like, all I do is play cops, and now I'm in a movie where people don't think I'm. You know, you have to see the movie to talk to me about it after. But
So when's
yeah,
that one coming out?
it's coming out Friday on Amazon Prime, God willing. The strike was based on the opaqueness of the industry, the lack of transparency between the distributors and the streaming sites. So Amazon, it says in the pipeline, so I have to preface it with that, but it is at Walmart right now.
Okay.
One of my investors went and got it today. I went to his business and took a picture with him with the poster. It's a badass movie. It's kind of like If the Town Met State of Grace with Sean Penn.
Yeah.
And it is, it's a crime thriller, and it's very well acted. We shot in Trenton, which is kind of untapped and gritty because Philly would have cost too much, and with the permits and everything, I didn't have the time to run through the red tape. But yeah, man, like Kevin Interdonato was in The Sopranos. His wife is the lead on a TV show called City on a Hill with Kevin Bacon.
City on the Hill, yeah.
She's the blonde in that television show. We have Brian Anthony Wilson, who was the Detective Holly in The Wire. If you've seen The Wire,
oh yeah,
on HBO, he's a
J.D. Williams on to play Bodie. We had him on the show.
Who was it?
Bodie. J.D. Williams is his name, but he played Bodie in The Wire.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Michael K. Williams, I was friends with, who passed away, but he was Omar in The Wire. He was Mike. Yep. He was Chalky White in Black. Sorry.
Fantastic actor, man.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. What a great. He popped off the screen, man. I remember watching him. Believe it or not, I was in two scenes. He kills me in the second one. First one, we're getting him. Steve Buscemi hires us to kill him, and it's like it took a week and a half. It's the first time being in the studio in Steiner Studio there in Brooklyn. I felt like I walked into the Wizard of Oz, man. Like, and this is what I learned from being on a series like that. When they're in their fourth season, you can sense when it's getting long for the workers. And a lot of the stagehands were old wise guys, family members, and they were yelling at the crew, and the crew's yelling. The lighting person's yelling at the AD's yelling at the director. It was like people were throwing, their scripts. It was getting kind of down to the wire, and I figured it was not going to last much longer. But Michael K. Williams was just. What's that?
What'd they do? 5 seasons out of that?
They did 5, yeah, but it was, the season before, I think they fired Michael Pitt. And the whole crew, like I said, the stagehands had been there all 5 seasons. So it was a good episode, man. It's called White Horse Pike. It's one of the episodes that I got a lot of love for. I'm in a series called The OA too with Phyllis Smith from The Office. Okay. Her story's incredible. I played Jimmy, I actually take a $50,000 check from Phyllis from The Office. Oh, and yeah, I've been around, man. You meet people like Phyllis, who just became an actor that was a casting director in New York, in Los Angeles, who the people that get it, usually they're better than you think they're going to be as people. It is a people business, and it's a great business, and I don't want to ever get too jaded where I'm not. A lot of it is the dealing with managers, the rejection. It doesn't get easier, you get better. Let's just put it that way.
Right. Now, the movie that you sent me that screener for, the trailer,
St. Michael of the City.
Who's the guy that's playing? I would assume he's the lead, the guy with the kind of a longer hair.
Yeah, that's Kevin Interdonato. He was on The Sopranos. Okay. He's the one I'm
by that trailer. Like he liked that role.
He wrote it because one of his favorite movies was State of Grace. So if you think about Gary Oldman in State of Grace,
yeah,
he was he played
those vibes.
Yeah, yeah. I actually lived in Hell's Kitchen with the children of the Coonans, and they were 2-bit pot dealers, man. And like I said, everybody that I knew, the Spillanes, Mickey Spillane,
Yeah.
Jimmy was one of the guys that was murdered by the Coonans. I know their children. A lot of them are doing well. But yeah, man, it's a small industry. It's a small world, and I'm
Yeah.
just happy to be here, brother.
I'm glad you could come on and talk to you, man. It's been fun. I can't wait to see this Sizemore thing come to light. Obviously, wish best of luck on the movie too. It's dropping here. We want everybody to go take a look at that. We'll put a link for it on IMDb in the show notes. Please let me know when the Sizemore thing comes to light, because I kind of have a little bit of a passion for that project as a viewer, because I did get to spend a couple hours, even if it was via a podcast with him, and then we texted some back and forth. And I'd really love to see, just him, even though it's going to be some of the times where you would wish he was doing a little bit better. You could see in that little sizzle that you sent, there's going to be times where you're going to smile, and I'd really love to see that.
He had days where you could tell he was completely sober. Actually, as a matter of fact, I drove to San Francisco the day that he was completely sober, and you could tell he was clear. And he was worn out when I got back from San Francisco, because I had never been, to Sacramento. I didn't realize how close it was to San Fran. And I came back. He goes, "I thought you flew somewhere to do an acting job." I said, "No, man, I just did. I don't know when I'm going to be back here." So I took a little trip, and went to Alcatraz, and then I came back, and he was just like, he's being honest is hard, man. It's just so hard. And you could just tell he had a rough day. And he talked about his dad. His dad had passed. And I'm telling you, the guy was fascinating. He was genuine in a lot of his interviews, even when he wasn't clean. And I miss him. I miss him already, man. It's been only a year,
Well, again, thank you for coming on the show. Let everybody know where they can go to follow you on any social medias that you have.
It's Rat's Corner Pulpit. As you can tell, I'm kind of long-winded. So it's like a little rat, plural, preaching in a pulpit. Rat's Corner Pulpit on Instagram. And I have a website called AdamRatcliffe.net. All my work is there. I've done a lot of it. Manhunt is one of the other ones. It was number 2 on Netflix. I Find the bombing in Atlanta. If you remember the Olympics bombing in Atlanta in '96.
Yeah.
So Richard Jewell.
Yeah.
Yes. So I found the bomb, and I'm the guy that says, "I bet there's Slim Jims, a condom, and meatloaf in that there bag." Soft Southern accent, my friend.
Another guy that movie come out when I was kind of in the middle of everything, and I remember thinking, like, God, how many people are in jail and got ridiculed and roasted in the press for something they didn't even do.
Correct.
Like, that was another one that really hit home for me. I started looking at a lot of things in a different light,
Yes.
after that happened, and, really wanted to bring awareness. That's why I've had people that have been wrongfully incarcerated on the show, because it happens way more than people want to talk about. People want to pretend like that doesn't happen. And I myself will openly admit, like, when I would see something on TV, and I would see they made an arrest, I'm like, well, good job. Police did their job. Glad they made the arrest. Now I'm like, nah.
I know. And it's funny that the entertainment industry hasn't helped it either over the decades of like, oh, we're all innocent. Everybody's innocent. We're all innocent too.
And now, with everything you got going on now with Diddy and you don't know what's going on. I watched that documentary that was on Max, I think, called Quiet on Set, about all the stuff that was going on to the kids on the Nickelodeon sets between the late 2000s or late 90s and early 2000s. I mean, it was nuts.
Yeah.
And again, things that happened to them, those kids, like, it affected them later on in life. They went down dark paths, some of them. And, it's a shame. But again, like we said, the importance of those documentaries is spreading awareness, because without those, people won't know. So I think it's great what you did with Tom. We look forward to seeing that movie. Any future projects you want to mention before we duck out?
I want to get Subway Sun made. That's my dream. But I'll be in. I just worked with Ridley Scott in a series called Sinking Springs. I'm a Philadelphian who works mostly in New York City and Pittsburgh. Believe it or not, I've worked in Cleveland on an Academy Award-winning film. But I finally got a nice little role in a series coming to Apple TV. Ridley Scott, Sinking Springs. It's actually based on a novel that won Best New York Times seller.
Well, Ridley's no slouch right there in the director role either, because he's got some good stuff up under his belt. So we look forward to seeing that. Adam, I want to thank you for coming on the show, my friend. I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it, man. Take care of your family. I'm really looking forward to staying in touch.
Absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Hollywood Wade. That was Adam Ratcliffe. And unfortunately, we are out of time. We'll see you next week right here on Crime and Entertainment. Adam, we appreciate it, my friend.
All right. Blessings. See you guys. Take care.